Well, folks, we're going to bring it out to the formal part of the program tonight, and that is the subject of the Federal Reserve System, which is the subject of the speech of our next speaker. You know, Federal Reserve System is like an enigma to a lot of people. I know when I first read a book called the Secrets of the Federal Reserve back in 1992 about the Federal Reserve, it was just a whole new, terribly different subject where I thought, wow, this is really something I don't know enough about, even after reading the book. There's a lot more that I wanted to and needed to learn. Well, our speaker is perhaps the most renowned author, researcher, and writer on the subject of the Federal Reserve and New World Order. Not to mention, he's also very renowned and knowledgeable in the field of health in areas like cancer. But we have him here tonight to speak about only one of the specialty subjects that he delves into with painstaking patience and verifies anything and everything that he says with verifiable sources. And yet, on top of that, he reduces complex subjects like the Federal Reserve, which were deliberately created to be complex and confusing, into as simple as possible the terms as possible. And that's why we have chosen this gentleman to be our speaker for tonight, because many of you want to know really what is the Federal Reserve about from a man who really knows the subject. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, Mr. G. Ed Griffin.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Payman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I have a little bit of a surprise for you all, probably a greater surprise for Payman than anybody, and that is that I'm not going to talk about the Federal Reserve today. I gave a lot of thought to that. I could have, of course, but I have a feeling that most of you here, or many of you anyway, are pretty familiar with that topic. You probably have heard my recording or read my book and heard other speakers on this topic. And I thought, well, why should I go over something that is well known, except for reinforcement, which of course always has value, when I could cover something entirely new and something which, in my opinion at least, is just as important as the Federal Reserve System and just as important as the fraudulent tax system, and a topic which generally doesn't get much exposure. So I'm going to do that tonight, something a little different, and I hope you feel that it's worthwhile and it's not a bait and switch, it's just a switch. I have a knee-jerk reaction to that. They talk about conspiracy theorists as though conspiracies weren't real. And I feel sorry for these people because I know they have never read a history book. Because history is full of conspiracies. In fact, it's hard to come up with a major event in history that wasn't created to some large and significant extent by a conspiracy or more of them. Conspiracies are very real in history. They're very real in our present day. If you doubt that, just go to any courtroom and sit there and listen to the cases that come before the judge and before the jury, and a good percentage of them involve conspiracies of one kind or another. So when people talk about conspiracy theories, I have to laugh. It's too bad they don't know anything about history. But nevertheless, the word does have some emotional overload to it. So let's talk about it. What is a conspiracy? Most of the dictionaries define it rather straightforwardly. To be a conspiracy, there must be three elements present. First, there must be two or more people involved. The second element is that they are using deceit or force. And the third element is to accomplish an illegal or immoral objective. That's a conspiracy. So the group that we're going to be talking about today, as you probably have already guessed, you're thinking ahead, they certainly involve two or more people. So that one is easy to check off. The second category, using deceit or force, real easy to check off because these people are masters at deceit and certainly masters at coercion. It's part of the style that they have adopted, and nobody challenges that. It's the third element where we have somewhat of a debate. Is their goal illegal or immoral? Well, sometimes they engage in illegal activities because they really don't care much about that. But for the most part, and their major operations are done entirely legally. Because you see, many of these people write the laws. They contour the laws to force you and me to do what they want us to do. And if we resist, we are the ones that are acting in an illegal fashion. Almost everything that this group is accomplishing is done entirely in accordance with the law. I can't think of a better example than the Federal Reserve System. Sometimes I hear people say, well, they ought to audit the Federal Reserve. Did you know that the Federal Reserve has never been officially audited by an independent agency? And I have to laugh. I don't care if it's audited. I don't want to audit the Federal Reserve. I want to abolish it. What is the point? Because I know that if they were to audit it, they'd find that the Federal Reserve was doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing according to the law. Everything is legal. They're stealing your money and mine legally. So you see, we're coming back to this question of legality. So we cannot say that this group is doing things essentially illegal either. So that is a fact. But now we deal to this question of moral. Is their goal moral or ethical? Well, you and I may think so, but I'm here to tell you that these people do not. They have their own set of values, their own ethics, their own morals. And ladies and gentlemen, they firmly believe, most of them, firmly believe that their goal is the highest morality, far higher than yours or mine. They are trying to build what they fondly call the New World Order. And to them, this is high morality. And it's the old Neanderthal throwbacks like you folks and me that insist on sovereignty and human dignity and so forth. We're the ones that have mental problems or moral problems in their minds. They are pursuing the highest moral standards in accordance with their own convictions. So you see, if we rely on the traditional definition of a conspiracy, in their minds, they are not involved in a conspiracy. However, in the minds of the rest of the people on this planet who have to live under the results of what they're trying to do, I think the word conspiracy is a very adequate and appropriate word. And that is the definition or the context in which I will be using it tonight. Now, Quigley described this conspiracy primarily in two books. Now, I understand that he also lectured on it extensively, and I'm sure that William Clinton kept extensive notes. But nevertheless, we don't have to worry about his lectures or the possibility of notes, because he published two books on it, and every detail that you could possibly wonder about is contained in those two volumes. The first one is called Tragedy and Hope, and the other one is The Anglo-American Establishment. They're available. You can buy them on our website. You can go to Google and search for it. You can go to Amazon. These books are now available, and I do urge you to read them. I have to warn you, they're dry reading. And most of it is enough to put you to sleep because it's dull history. But every once in a while, you'll come across a passage that is so startling, you'll shake your head and say, did he really say that? And you go back and read it, and by golly, he really did say that. You need to read these books. For the purpose of our presentation here, I'd like to summarize what you will find. Now, these will be my words. This is my best effort to summarize what Quigley was talking about, and some others, by the way, a few other people as well. And then, having done that, I will come back and give you some extensive quotations to show that my summary is accurate. Otherwise, you may wonder that I'm perhaps exaggerating or leaving out some details. So here's my summary. At the end of the 19th century, a secret society was formed by Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, as all of you know, I'm sure, was one of the wealthiest men in the world. He was the political head man in South Africa, the chancellor, I believe they called him. And while he was there, he was able to acquire control over all of the diamond deposits and the gold deposits of South Africa. All of the mineral reserves. And in that period of time, he amassed one of the greatest, if not the greatest, fortune in the world. What people don't realize is that when he died, none of that money went to his heirs. Where did it go? It went through a series of 7 wills to create a secret society. The purpose of the secret society was to create a structure that would literally control the world from behind the scenes in a fashion that the average man or woman would never see it or never suspect it even existed. The Rhodes Scholarship, which most people know about, was just the tip of the iceberg that was created in one of the wills of Cecil Rhodes. And the purpose of the Rhodes Scholarship was to provide a funnel or a recruiting mechanism to find the most appropriate, the most likely individuals, young men and women, who could be recruited into this secret society. It should come as no surprise that William Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Fits perfectly into this scenario. This secret organization is not just of historical interest, it exists today. And according to Quigley and other observers who are close to it, it is the most important single historical force in the world since World War I. Just think about that for a moment. Is it true? Well, we'll cover a few facts and you judge it for yourself. The goal of the secret organization originally was to expand the British Empire and the men who were behind it, not necessarily the royalty, but the real political figures behind it, and I'll mention some of their names in a moment, to extend the British Empire to control the world, because Rhodes and his associates believed that the British had acquired the highest culture, the highest level of morality, according at least to his definitions of morality, and the highest standard of living, the most perfect language. He felt that the race was superior, and that for the benefit of the rest of the world, for their good, it was their responsibility. This group, using the British Empire, was their responsibility to rule the world for the benefit of the world, of course. That was very carefully spelled out in their writings and their goals. Now, this evolved not too long after the organization was put into motion. It changed. The goal changed. World domination didn't change. Control from behind the scenes by a very small elect group didn't change. But what did change is that the focal point for this was no longer the British or the, England, but it was to be a new world order, international in scope, and to be housed through an international organization of some kind. Initially, they had hoped that it would be the League of Nations, and all of their members worked very hard to create the League of Nations for that purpose. And when that failed, then they set their sights on the United Nations, which finally was put into action and now is on a fast track to becoming the very structure which they had projected as their goal. And now, of course, the center of all of this, instead of being in England, is focused primarily in New York. Now, the method by which this secret organization was to accomplish this incredible goal was not to be visible and not to go forth and influence the people directly. People weren't even supposed to suspect that such a thing was going on. The people were not even supposed to know the names, primarily, of the big players. They weren't to be in the news at all. The way this was to be done was indirectly, through the power centers of society, as they're called. The strategists behind this are brilliant, and they realized that human beings have a herd instinct. We clump together, most of us. A few hermits get off in the wilderness and do okay, but most of us get nervous out in the wilderness, and we congregate into villages and cities, and beyond that, we come together in organizations like this. We have leaders. We join labor unions. We affiliate with political parties. We come together in church organizations, and we send our kids to schools that are organized, and we have Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. And the way we operate is that we work through groups and organizations, and we follow leaders. They had this all figured out. They said, therefore, the way for us to lead the masses is not directly one-on-one, but what we must do is control the leadership of the organizations to which people belong. We don't need that many people to do that. So with just 1% or 0.1% of the population, we can control the entire population by controlling the power centers of society. That was their strategy from the beginning, and it is their strategy today. And I might add, it is an extremely effective strategy. The structure of this secret organization was outwardly modeled after the Jesuit order. Yes, incredible, isn't it? But Rhodes was an admirer of the organizational genius in his mind of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, and he said we should use that as our model. He didn't take it straight across, but he took many elements from it. And at the deeper level, though, it is interesting, I think, and very instructive to note, that he borrowed the structure of classic conspiracy control directly from Adam Weishaupt. Now, those of you who have studied this thing, you recognize that name. Adam Weishaupt was the founder of the Illuminati. And we all know a little bit about the Illuminati because it was disbanded in Bavaria shortly after it was formed. And their secret records and notebooks and so forth were seized and placed into the public record, so you can go to a library today and read verbatim the organizational structure of the original Illuminati. Now, there's a debate as to whether or not the Illuminati really was destroyed or whether it just went underground and still exists today. I think that debate is interesting, and I have my own opinions about it, but they're just opinions. In the final analysis, it's not too important because we know that there are shoots coming up from the ground with identical structures all over the place. Now, whether those shoots are coming up from seeds or roots, I don't think makes too much difference. The fact is that we have had many organizational imitations of the Illuminati, and this secret one that we're talking about here, created by Cecil Rhodes, is a perfect example. Now, what is that structure I'm talking about? It's what they call rings within rings within rings. That's the way they usually refer to it. And what that means is this. Weishaupt said that in the center of his Illuminati organization, there would be a controlling group of maybe 3 or 4 people, just a small number. These in turn would create a membership ring around them of a larger number, of perhaps 20 or 30 or something like that. And the members of that ring would not be aware that they were being dominated and controlled by the inner circle. Now that outer ring then in turn, thinking that they were the whole enchilada, would then create a larger ring around it, comprising of hundreds or perhaps thousands of people. And those people would not suspect that they were being dominated and directed by an inner ring. And then finally, that last ring would create still another one that would reach out to mass organizations, reach out to the masses. And in that fashion, Weishaupt said that a few of us in the center, through this carefully controlled structure of rings within rings, can control the world. And the people being controlled would never know that that's how it worked. Now that's the structure that Weishaupt created and described at some length, and it's interesting to me that Rhodes selected that very structure for his secret society. Now, let's take a look. Boy, I'm glad there's not lead attached to that. The result of all this, ladies and gentlemen, is that this structure, this secret society, remains invisible to the average person. And it remains invisible not only because of its structure and because of its secrecy, but also because it has had the foresight of not having a name. Now just think about that for a minute. If you say that you have an organization or you create an organization and somebody says, well, what are we going to call ourselves? And the answer is, we're not going to call ourselves anything. We're not going to have a name. That way, nobody can talk about us. Brilliant. And that's what they decided to do. Quigley himself doesn't know how to describe it. At some places in his books, he calls it the network. In other places, he calls it the Rhodes Group. In other places, he just calls it the group. It has no name. And so therefore, that's another reason that it's invisible to the average person today. Now, at the inner circle of this organization that I'm describing, that was called the Society of the Elect. It originally consisted of Cecil Rhodes and a small brain trust of his very wealthy and influential political cronies from British politics and British banking. The center of gravity, as I said earlier, shortly thereafter, after Rhodes' death, didn't take long before the center of gravity shifted away to the Rockefeller Group, which was very quick to move into that circle. And now we see that there are centers or secondary centers of influence within the Rockefeller Group and centers within such organizations as the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission, to name just a few. And the goal shifted away from creating a world empire based in England to a world empire based in New York called the New World Order, but based on the model of collectivism. Now, the secondary rings around this Society of the Elect that Cecil Rhodes created were called roundtables. That's the name they gave them, roundtables. And these existed in the United States, Britain, and all the former British dependencies. Finally, there was a tertiary group or ring around that was created. Each of those roundtables in each of the countries created another ring larger around it, and they called those, in most of the British dependencies, they called those the Royal Institute for International Affairs. You'll find that in England, you'll find it in Canada, and so forth. That's what it's called. It's still there. Very powerful, prominent institutions in British politics in all of these countries. In the United States, for some reason which I've never been able to find out, they didn't choose that name, I suppose because royal wouldn't be an acceptable word in the United States. So in the U.S., they call it the Council on Foreign Relations. And ladies and gentlemen, after 100 years of penetration into the power centers of society, The Rhodesian network, which I call it, I have given it a name, and I hope you'll pick it up and use it because we have to identify this group. I call it the Rhodesian network, or the Rhodesians. After 100 years, the Rhodesians now are very close to the final achievement of their goal in the Western world. Now, I add the phrase "in the Western world" because we must not lose sight of the fact when we're looking at this group that there is another group out there which is just as dangerous, just as secret, just as cunning as the Rhodesians. And they, by the way, took a clue from the Rhodesians, and they got rid of their name a few years ago. We used to call them communists, and then they got rid of their name. They pretended to go away. They pretended that they crumbled overnight. Great miracle. They're still there. I call them the Leninists. They have never renounced the theories or the goals of Lenin. They just renounced communism. Well, they never really had communism in any of those countries anyway. They always referred to themselves as socialists or Leninists or what have you. But all the old former communist commissars simply took their hat off when it said communist on the front of it. They turned it around, and now it said social democrat. But you notice it's the same heads underneath the hats. The heads didn't change, nor did their real policies. But I want to emphasize that there is another very large and powerful and dangerous group out there, which I call the Leninists. And the Leninists and the Rhodesians are often seen warring against each other. Just take a look at Mr. Bush in Washington, D.C., and in Venezuela we've got Chavez. Now there's a perfect example of the Rhodesians versus the Leninists. And they fight each other. They are opposed to each other. They criticize each other. They hate each other. But the world that they want is the same. The only thing they disagree with is not ideology. It's who is going to run this new world order. Is it going to be the so-called left, or will it be the so-called right? And when you peel off all of those labels and you look underneath, you'll find that in all of these camps, what they really stand for is collectivism. That's the word we should be using. They're all collectivist in nature. But then they wrap themselves in flags and different rhetoric, and they appear to oppose each other. But I want to emphasize, just because we are focusing tonight on one group does not mean that that is the only place we need to keep our guard up. Because we have another equally potential group very much alive in the world today. Now, that is my summary. It's time now to let the conspirators describe it, and so I'm going to do some reading for you. I guess I'm blowing into this. Is that what I'm doing? I hate to read a lot in a speech, but in this case I feel that I have to, because otherwise you'd think that I was making some of this up. So I'm going to do a little extensive reading and let you see that the conspirators themselves really have said basically what I have said. Now, we'll begin, where am I? Okay. We'll begin in Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. And he says this. He says, I know of the operation of this network. There he calls it a network. Because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years during the 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of the instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. Now, in the Anglo-American establishment, Quigley says this. The Rhodes Scholarship established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' seventh will are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes, in 5 previous wills, left his fortune to form a secret society which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. And what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society continues to exist to this day. To be sure, it is not a childish thing like the Ku Klux Klan, and it does not have any secret robes, secret hand clasps, or secret passwords. It does not need any of these, since its members know each other intimately. It probably has no oaths of secrecy, nor any formal procedure of initiation. It does, however, exist and hold secret meetings. This group, as I shall show, is one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. Now, one of the original leaders of this group, one of the organizers, was a fellow by the name of William Stead. Now, William Stead was so important that he was the executor of Cecil Rhodes' will. So he should know what he's talking about. And he wrote a book entitled The Last Will and Testament of C.J. Rhodes. And in that book, William Stead said this: Mr. Rhodes was more than the founder of a dynasty. He aspired to be the creator of one of those vast, semi-religious, quasi-political associations which, like the Society of Jesus, have played so large a part in the history of the world. To be more strictly accurate, he wished to found an order as the instrument of the will of the dynasty. So you see, they're looking at this like an order. It's not just a group or an organization, it's an order, like the Knights Templar or something like that. It's a chivalric order. In Cecil Rhodes' handwritten manuscript, this was not published until fairly recently, we find this coming directly from Cecil Rhodes' own pen. He said, I contend that we English are the finest race in the world, and that... I don't know what to do about this. Stop breathing, I guess. He says, I contend that we English are the finest race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. What scheme could we think of to forward this object? I look into history, and I read the story of the Jesuits. I see what they were able to do in a bad cause, and I might say, under bad leaders. In the present day, I became a member of the Masonic order. I see the wealth and power they possess, the influence they hold, and I think over their ceremonies, and I wonder that a large body of men can devote themselves to what at times appear to be the most ridiculous and absurd rites, without an object and without an end. The idea, gleaming and dancing before one's eyes, like a will-o'-the-wisp, at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society, but with one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule? So there you have it from the mind of the founder. Back to Quigley. In his own words, he says that the goal of the secret society was, quote, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. Now, you see the trilateral meetings and the Bilderberg meetings begin to take on more significance when you realize that that's really part of this plan. On page 4 of the Anglo-American Establishment, Quigley says this: this organization has been able to conceal its existence quite successfully, and many of its most influential members, satisfied to possess the reality rather than the appearance of power, are unknown even to close students of British history, partly because of the deliberate policy of secrecy which this group has adopted. You see there he calls it a group, which this group has adopted, partly because the group itself is not closely integrated but rather appears as a series of overlapping circles or rings, partly concealed by being hidden behind formally organized groups of no obvious political significance. End quote. And then regarding the conspiratorial structure of this group, Quigley tells us this, quote, in the secret society, Rhodes was to be leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee called the Society of the Elect. Arthur, Lord Balfour, Sir Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert, Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers. Those phrases, ladies and gentlemen, that I just read are lifted from Adam Weishaupt. Those are his phrases. Association of Helpers. This was later organized by Milner as the Round Table organizations that I mentioned a moment ago. After the death of Cecil Rhodes, the organization fell under the control of Lord Alfred Milner, who recruited young men from the upper class of society to become part of the Association of Helpers, which, as I mentioned, became later known as the Round Tables. Now, this group of young men, recruited from the higher levels of British society, were unofficially called, at that time, Milner's Kindergarten. Of course, they were young men. They were coming up in politics and in banking, and they came from the finest families. But they called them Milner's Kindergarten because they worked very closely together, and they tutored them and helped them get into positions of authority, especially in government. Now, they were placed into the power centers of society, and eventually they became the round table organizations in each of those countries. And so they were the inner circle of a larger circle around them. Now, while reviewing all of this, it's important for us to keep in mind that the primary purpose of a secret society is to keep secrets. It's pretty obvious. But that means that one of their major objectives is deceit. You have to be deceitful if you're going to keep secrets, even if you simply say, I don't know, which Hillary Clinton, I was just informed, who probably attended the last Bilderberg meeting, but when they asked her on camera, did she attend the Bilderberg meeting, she said, I don't know anything about that. And I guess the reporter said, well, your husband attended the last one. And she said, oh, he did? I don't know anything about it. See? Well, anyway, that's what you'd expect. If you have an affiliation with a secret society, you better be prepared for a little bit of deceit or you're not a good member. Now, to the gullible public, these people deny their plans and their goals, obviously, because the public, for the large part, would not necessarily understand them in an approving way. So, they do. They lie a lot. But when they speak to themselves in their own private papers and before conclaves which are expected to remain confidential, they often tell the whole unvarnished truth. And every once in a while, if you're researching all of their papers, you'll find a little gem, which I'm going to, like the one I'm going to read to you now. This one was written by one of Milner's Kindergarten. His name, you'll recognize, Arnold Toynbee. He's a renowned historian. He was a professor at the London School of Economics. He was a director of studies at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which was a front for the Round Table. He was a British intelligence agent and the author of that very famous 12-volume History of the World. It's called A Study of History, which extols the virtue of world government and collectivism. So he's a big guy. In November of 1931, in that issue of International Affairs, which was published as an insider publication just for members of that round table, this is what Toynbee said, and this is a gem. He said, I will hereby repeat that we are at present working discreetly, but with all our might, to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local national states of the world. And all the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands. End quote. And that, of course, just makes sense. People want to go to the members of the Council on Foreign Relations and say, are you guys really planning world government and loss of sovereignty and so forth? Of course not, they say. Are you really planning to merge America, the United States, with Canada and Mexico? Absurd. This is just part of the game, and you must understand it. Now, world government doesn't just happen by writing some articles or books. Only when people are in control of power centers of society can they bring about massive changes like this. Not scholarship, but power. It's not public opinion, but power. Power is the key, and the power centers of society are what amalgamate and give these people power over their citizens. Now, how this came about, Quigley describes this. It's very interesting what he says. How did this come about? He said, through Lord Milner's influence, these men were able to win influential posts in government, in international finance, and become the dominant influence in British imperial affairs and foreign affairs up to 1939. In 1909 through 1913, they organized semi-secret groups known as roundtable groups. We're covering the same ground here again. In the chief British dependencies and the United States. These still function in 8 countries. The task was given to Lionel Curtis, who established in England and each dominion a front organization to the existing local roundtable group. This front organization, called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, had as its nucleus in each area the existing submerged roundtable group. In New York, it was known as the Council on Foreign Relations and was a front for J.P. Morgan and Company. All right. At last we come to this ubiquitous Council on Foreign Relations. You hear more and more about it. Even increasingly now on the news, you'll say, and here is a word from so-and-so from the Council on Foreign Relations office. And the average gum-chewing public says, that sounds good. I wonder what that's all about. So increasingly, this phrase, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, is becoming more and more, at least common. People don't know what it is, but they've heard it. So it's no longer frightening when they hear it. So we are informed by Quigley and others that the Council on Foreign Relations was spawned by a secret society which still exists today, that it is a front for a roundtable group originally embodied in J.P. Morgan and Company, but now the Rockefeller Consortium, and that its primary goal is no longer the expansion of the British Empire, but global collectivism, with control in private hands, administered in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these are their words, not mine. Now, why is this important? It is important because the members of the Council on Foreign Relations are the rulers of America. Can I back that up? I think I can. Who are the members of the Council on Foreign Relations? It's a very long list. Actually, there's about 4,000 names. And it's available, by the way, if you write to the Council on Foreign Relations office on your own letterhead, especially if it's a corporate letterhead. So I'd like a copy of the annual report. You'll get it. I've been collecting these for many years, and in the back of each report, they have the list of the current members. And here's what I found. Let's start with presidents of the United States. Council members include Herbert Hoover, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, James Carter, George Bush Sr., and William Clinton. Now, JFK once said that he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, but I've not been able to find his name on any of the membership lists. So he's confused over that. I guess he wanted to be, but never quite made it in. Now, former presidential candidate John Kerry is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And if anything should happen to President Bush, then Richard Cheney would become president, and he is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Secretaries of State, undoubtedly, to this group are more important than presidents, because the presidents often just take advice. I mean, there's so much going on. They've got their cabinet, and they've got people telling them what to do. And so the Secretary of State is a critical figure, a critical position in this New World Order. And so it's not surprising to find that just about every Secretary of State from the beginning has been a member of the CFR. Here's the list. Dean Rusk, Robert Lansing, Frank Kellogg, Henry Stimson, Cordell Hull, E.R. Stettinius, George Marshall, Dean Acheson, John Foster Dulles, Christian Herter, Dean Rusk, William Rogers, Henry Kissinger, Cyrus Vance, Edmund Muskie, Alexander Haig, George Shultz, James Baker, Lawrence Egelberger, Warren Christopher, William Richardson, Madeleine Albright, Colin Powell, and of course, Condoleezza Rice. The Secretaries of Defense, pretty important position if you're going to build a new world order and use coercion if necessary, include James Forrestal, George Marshall, Charles Wilson, Neil McElroy, Robert McNamara, Melvin Laird, Elliot Richardson, James Schlesinger, Harold Brown, Caspar Weinberger, Frank Carlucci, Richard Cheney, Les Aspin, William Perry, William Cohen, and Donald Rumsfeld. CIA directors: Walter Smith, William Colby, Richard Helms, Allen Dulles, John McCone, James Schlesinger, George Bush Sr., Stansfield Turner, William Casey, William Webster, Robert Gates, James Woolsey, John Deutsch, William Studeman, George Tenet, Porter Goss, and Michael Hayden. Now, some better-known corporations with CFR members at the board or chief executive levels, which means they exert dominance and, for all practical purposes, control over the policies of these large corporations. Now, this is a long list, and I'm not going to read to you any more than just the tip of the iceberg. But they include Atlantic Richfield Oil Company, AT&T, Avon Products, Bechtel Construction Group, Boeing Company, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Chevron, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi-Cola, Consolidated Edison of New York, Exxon, Dow Chemical, DuPont Chemical, Eastman Kodak, Enron, Estee Lauder, Ford Motor, General Electric, General Foods, Hewlett-Packard, Hughes Aircraft, IBM, International Paper, Johnson & Johnson, Levi Strauss & Company, Lockheed Aerospace, Lucent Technologies, Mobil Oil, Monsanto, Northrop, Pacific Gas and Electric, Phillips Petroleum, Procter & Gamble, Quaker Oats, SBC Yahoo, Shell Oil, SmithKline Beecham Pharmaceuticals, Sprint Corporation, Texaco, Santa Fe Southern Pacific Railroad, Teledyne, TRW, Southern California Edison, Unical, United Technologies, Verizon Communications, Warner Lambert, Weyerhaeuser, and Xerox, to name just a few. Now, in the media, pretty important place to be if you want to control public opinion, we find CFR members in management and operational positions at the following media corporations: the Army Times, Associated Press, Association of American Publishers, Barron's, Boston Globe, Business Week, Christian Science Monitor, Dallas Morning News, Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, New York Post, San Diego Union Tribune, Times Mirror, Random House, W.W. Norton and Company, Warner Books, American Spectator, Atlantic, Harper's, Farm Journal, Financial World, Insight, Washington Times, Medical Tribune, National Geographic, National Review, New Republic, New Yorker, Newsday, Newsmax, Newsweek, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Reader's Digest, Rolling Stone, Scientific American, Time Warner, Time, U.S. News and World Report, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC, PBS, RCA, and the Walt Disney Company. Did we leave anybody out? I don't think so. Not on the list yet. Could be, though. I just didn't locate it.
American Free Press?
Pardon?
American Free Press?
I'm going to check into those guys. All right, the media personalities, the talking heads. Not so important, but still important. David Brinkley, Tom Brokaw, William Buckley, Peter Jennings, Bill Moyers, Dan Rather, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, Katie Couric, and Andrea Mitchell, wife of Alan Greenspan. And by the way, Greenspan, in case you were wondering, former chairman of the Federal Reserve System, is a member of the CFR. Labor unions. with CFR members in key positions at the top include AFL-CIO, United Steelworkers of America, United Auto Workers, American Federation of Teachers, Bricklayers and Allied Craft, Communications Workers of America, Union of Needle Trades, and Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers. In the tax-exempt foundations and the think tanks, which often create policies which the government then implement, the number of CFR members in controlling positions is 443, as of my last count. Could be more, could be less today, but it's in that range. Some of the better-known names are the Sloan and Kettering Foundations, the Aspen Institute, the Atlantic Council, Bilderberg Group, Brookings Institute, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Carnegie Foundation, Ford Foundation, Guggenheim Foundation, Hudson Institute, John and Catherine MacArthur Foundation, Mellon Foundation, Rand Corporation, Rhodes Scholarship Selection Commission, Rockefeller Foundation and Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Trilateral Commission, and the UN Association. By the way, if you've ever wondered where all of these radical groups get their money that are agitating for all kinds of disruptive things in the United States, all of the radical La Raza groups, a few years ago they had the little band of radicalized American Indians messing up the Northwest. They're all funded by these organizations, tax-exempt foundations. That's where the money comes from. Now, in the universities, the number of CFR members who are or have been at the very tops as professors or presidents or department heads, board members, the total number is 563. In the financial institutions such as banks, the Federal Reserve, the stock exchanges, the brokerage houses, the number of CFR members with controlling positions is 284. Now, as I mentioned before, the total membership of this group is approximately 4,000 people. There are a lot of organizations, a lot of church organizations in your hometown that have that many members or more. Now, wouldn't you be surprised that if you were to discover that if the members of just that one local church dominated American politics and corporate structures and communications and universities, that they were controlling the United States, just that one little group, wouldn't you be amazed? Wouldn't you wonder what was going on? Wouldn't you start asking some questions? It would be pretty hard, however, for you to get answers to those questions if it turned out that the media and the channels through which those questions would be asked and answered were controlled by members of that same church. And that's essentially the kind of a situation that we have facing America today. Note that this group, this Council on Foreign Relations, is not the inner core of a secret society. It's that third ring, or it's 2 rings out from the center at least. What does that mean? That means a lot of those people don't have the slightest clue as to who is directing them or why. And don't forget that the ring beyond that is much bigger. That ring is called the Republican Democrat Party. That's the next ring out. And there are rings beyond that. None of those people know that they're being directed from the inside, you see. So these people are unaware, most of them, some of them know, but most of them are totally unaware of the control or the purpose of the CFR. I think most of them are opportunists who look at the CFR as more or less a high-powered employment agency. If you are invited to become a member and you get on their membership list, you don't have to worry about a good job ever again. Because every time these people are looking for a reliable, trustworthy person with the right mental outlook, and they're looking for someone to hire, they look on that membership list and they know that that's a safe list. And so they're always being offered jobs. And people know that, even though they may not know why. So a lot of them are just opportunists. And you see, you don't get on that list just because you're a good guy or because you're a smart guy. You've been very carefully analyzed, and you have to be invited by certain people, and you have been analyzed to show that you have this goal in your mind of internationalism, collectivism, and the New World Order. If you don't express a sympathy with that goal, you will never be invited to join the CFR. And even if you do have that goal, you may not be invited, because now they want to look at you and see how potentially powerful you can be, how smart you are, what are your connections, what are you doing in life, and possibly they even look to see how ruthless you are. I don't know. But anyway, I want to emphasize that just because people are in the Council on Foreign Relations does not mean that they're part of the inner core of the secret society. Now, there are three things we must understand about this group. One is they are not partisan. This is perhaps the most important thing for us to know today, is that this is not an issue of Republicans versus Democrats. You find about an equal number of Republicans and Democrats on this membership list. To these people, political partisanship is a joke. They have much bigger fish to fry. They use partisan politics as a gimmick to manipulate the thinking and the loyalties and the activities of the common man. None of these people are Democrats or Republicans with the capital letters in front of them, only as a matter of convenience. That's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that they are elitists. They intend to rule the world. For the world's own good, of course, you understand. But they really believe that their vision of the New World Order, based on the model of collectivism, is the highest morality, and they intend to use any method whatsoever to bring that about. They consider that they are at war to bring that about. And people like you and me are the enemy in that war. We must be defeated. We must be annihilated. To them, they adopt the morality of war. What is the morality of war? In wartime, there is only one immoral act, and that is to lose. And that's their mentality. You keep that in mind when you're dealing with these people. They would be totally ruthless. And if it's necessary to put innocent people in prison, so be it. If it's necessary to engineer an event that would cause the loss of thousands of American lives, so be it, because they are at war and they do not intend to lose. The third thing to know is that the method by which they intend to rule is called democracy. We're back to that word now, democracy. The problem arises: how does a ruling elite control the masses in an age where people have been conditioned to think that they should determine their own political destiny? I mean, we've been taught, like in that classroom, we'll vote on everything, and our vote will make it correct. And as long as we're given the vote, everything is fine. We've been taught that. So how does the ruling elite deal with that mass psychology where everybody thinks that they should have a right to vote on their leaders and on the issues and so forth? And the answer is quite simple. How do you keep the gum-chewing public out of the way? And that leads to the title of my presentation, which is the Quigley Formula. Quigley answers that question in his book. He says, to perpetuate the deception of democracy, to allow people to continue to think that they are participating in their own political destiny, all we have to do is to create two political parties and control them both, and let the idiots jump from one party to the next and choose one candidate versus the other, as long as they never get out of that two-box trap that we set for them. Let them really battle each other on secondary issues, but when it comes to the final end game of building a new world order, based on the model of collectivism, all candidates in both parties must be in total agreement. That's the Quigley formula. Does it sound familiar? Did Quigley really say that? He did. Here's what he said. The national parties and their presidential candidates, with the Eastern establishment assiduously fostering the process behind the scenes, moved closer together and nearly met in the center with almost identical candidates and platforms, although the process was concealed as much as possible by the revival of obsolescent or meaningless war cries and slogans, often going back to the Civil War. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to the doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extreme shifts in policy. Either party in office becomes in time corrupt, tired, unenterprising, and vigorless. Then it should be possible to replace it every 4 years, if necessary, by the other party, which will be none of these things, but which will still pursue with new vigor approximately the same basic policies. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Quigley formula. And if it sounds familiar, it's because we have been living under that formula since at least World War I. Just think about that. And not 1 in 1,000 people has been aware of it. Now, what are these basic policies that Quigley is talking about? It is anything that advances the New World Order based on the model of collectivism. The candidates and the parties should be fierce campaigners. They should attack each other with great vigor, but when the elections are over, they will work as a team for their common goals. All else is showmanship. Are we running out of battery?
We're running out of batteries.
Stand by after a word from this sponsor. Are we on yet? Test, test, test. Test, test? Okay. So, as long as they're advancing the goal of the New World Order based on the model of collectivism, then everything else is just showmanship. Let's turn to a couple of brief examples. Just about every major political event in American history and American politics since World War II is a good example if you know what to look for. But let's not go all the way back. Pick it up with, let's say, the Panama Canal. The Carter administration gave away the Panama Canal, as you know, and nobody wanted that. The voters didn't want that. Republican voters didn't want that. Democrat voters didn't want it. They conducted polls among the American people, and the poll was overwhelmingly, I don't know, 85% or something, about save the Panama Canal for the American people, and the other 15% that didn't care. I mean, they just didn't have an opinion. And yet they gave away the Panama Canal. Why? Who were these elected representatives serving? That happened to have been the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it was the drive to give away the Panama Canal was led on both sides of the aisle by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, at a more current day, the Republicans, of course, are clamoring for war in the Middle East, and they advocate that we give more power to the UN. Now, the Democrats, they're different. They call for peace in the Middle East and advocate that we give more power to the UN. And of course, after the Democrats did win a majority in Congress, we thought, or some people thought, oh, now there's going to be a big shift in policy. Well, there wasn't, was there? Quigley called it exactly. They could argue about it in campaign days, but once you're elected, you go back to what you're programmed to do, which is to follow the directives of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, Republicans promote legislation to restrict rights in the name of terrorism. Now, the Democrats give speeches of concern over that, and then they vote for those laws. There's really no difference except the rhetoric. The electorate does not want that, but that is the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. And by the way, the legislation for the Patriot Acts 1 and 2 and all the rest of these liberty-stealing acts that are coming through, all of those were written in principle before 9/11, and they were written by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Democrats promote legislation to restrict freedom in the name of stopping global warming. The Republicans object strongly to that, and then they vote for those laws. Now, the electorate doesn't want that, but that is the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Republicans are all for restricting freedom of speech in order to prevent sedition, anti-sedition laws to protect America and to protect the government, to protect our homeland. And the Democrats don't like that, but they promote similar laws in the name of stopping hate speech. Hate speech now is prohibited. The American people don't want that, either of those, but both of those are the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. Republicans give speeches about the danger of illegal immigration. The Democrats give speeches about compassion. And then both of them join together and support measures and soon-to-be laws and treaties that will merge Canada, the United States, and Mexico together as one political unit, and there will no longer even be an issue of immigration, because we'll all be one big country. The American people don't want that, but that is the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. Republican leaders steal elections outright using electronic voting machines that were designed to be fraudulent. It's not something that was hacked into and some evil person figured out how to rig a perfectly innocent election voting machine. These machines were designed from the very beginning to do that. Now, you would think the Democrats would be outraged because their candidates have lost elections with this rigged voting machines, but they're not. Oh, they say, I wonder if we lost the election. They do nothing. They remain silent because they know that rigged voting machines are really the ultimate form of the Quigley formula. They know that this is a way, ultimately, to allow the American people to think that they're participating in their own political destiny, and they have no idea what's going on in those machines, and the newscasters will tell them how they voted. And they're just waiting for their turn, the Democrats are. I think if they've been told, next election is their turn, so be patient. You see, these people are like wrestlers. Phony wrestlers. My grandmother used to watch wrestling matches. She'd get all excited, you know. Did you see that guy? Man, he hit him hard. He threw him out of the ring. I said, Gram, calm down. These are professionals. It's all put on. They rehearse this stuff. Oh, I don't think so. He really hit him hard, you know. I could never convince her that that was phony. The guy with the red mask or the guy with the black tights, they're mean-looking guys. How could they be phony? That's American politics, ladies and gentlemen. It's a phony wrestling match, and these guys are in it, and they can hardly wait until the American people are so dumbed down and so passive that they will accept electronic voting machines to tell them how they voted. And both political parties are in on that at the top. Now, there's quite a grassroots movement to expose all this and to reverse all this, but you'll find that this is coming from the grassroots. There's no support whatsoever from the top of either political party. Now, we've got to talk about the cheerleaders. It's not just the political candidates themselves, but the cheerleaders are out there to tell us how to think and to shape the debate. And they're the ones that really have as much or maybe more influence on how we vote than the candidates themselves. So, who are the cheerleaders? Rush Limbaugh would be one. I would put him right up there at the top. If there was an award to give to a Quigley Formula cheerleader, he would get an award. He does a great job of exposing and ridiculing corrupt Democrats, but he never met a Republican he didn't like, regardless. He's all for the UN and will never mention the CFR. Never. On the other side, we've got such a nice, likable guy as Michael Moore. Now, Michael does a great job of exposing and ridiculing corrupt Republicans, but he never met a Democrat he didn't like. And he's all for the UN and will never mention the CFR. There's an organization that you've all heard about called Accuracy in Media. I used to think they were pretty good because they did a great job of exposing the deceit and treachery within the ranks of Democrats. And then finally it dawned on me, hey guys, what about the other side of the aisle? They never mention deceit and treachery among the Republican groups, and they never mention the CFR. There's an organization called Move On. It does a great job of exposing deceit and treachery within the ranks of Republicans. But it never criticizes Democrats whatsoever, and never mentions the CFR. You're beginning to get the picture here. We have cheerleaders that are on the payroll. Now, the Quigley formula has turned voters into tennis balls. We have a tennis game, and then the Republican candidates on one side of the net and the Democrat candidates on the other, and we're the tennis balls. We're supposed to decide the outcome of our political destiny. So we allow ourselves to be hit really hard by one of the players, and we bounce over the net. We get over there, say this is better, and then finally we get hit, and back and forth, back and forth. We don't like this, we don't like that. And what happens is that Americans begin to choose their candidates not of what they like, but what they hate. People used to vote for a man or a candidate because they liked it. Now they vote because they hate the other one. It's the politics of hate. We get hit so hard. We hate Bush. We hate Clinton. So I'm not going to vote for those guys. We'll vote for the other ones. We won't look at their record. We won't look at their political principles. In fact, we don't even think about political principles. You'd never find political principles discussed in the political debates. It's always some issue which is devoid of principles. And I think that little kids in the first grade classroom voting on the gender of a kitten are more apt to come up with the right answer than the American people voting on political parties or candidates without any knowledge of political principles whatsoever. The kids stand a better chance. And so we're like these tennis balls being thrown back and forth, back and forth. Well, the players can win a game, but the tennis ball never wins. And that's where we are today. All right, now we come to the end. What is the solution? Well, are you ready for this? There isn't any. Ask anyone, they'll tell you it's all over. Collectivism has won. We are serfs in a modern high-tech feudalism. Our lords and masters control us. They control our money. They control our media. They control our political parties. They control our educational institutions. They control the places where we work. They control everything. They control the military. They control the police. You think we're going to change this? Those who benefit from this are too comfortable and happy with it. And those who suffer under it are afraid to speak out for fear they will be punished. So it's all over. Get used to it.
Baloney.
Now wait a minute. I just had an idea. What would happen if just 2% of the American people came together and, knowing what we've been talking about tonight, they were determined to defeat this monster? Just 2%. What if they understood the principles of freedom? It's not that they were just voting against something. I don't like this, I don't like that. What if they understood what they wanted? What if they had a creed of freedom and really knew what freedom was based upon and cared enough to study it and to teach it to their kids? What if they joined together in a network involving people with similar ideas from all nations, all cultures, all races, all religions, and formed into a true international brotherhood of freedom? And what if they understood, really understood, the strategy of influencing society by influencing the power centers of society instead of just throwing themselves out randomly What if they understood the structure of society and said, hey, we're going to help each other and work with each other to become effective and dominant in the power centers of society and take them back just the way we lost them? Do you think if we did that, we could defeat this monster? Yes, I think so too. In fact, I know we can. And fortunately, there is an organization, a structure that is exactly like that. It's called Freedom Force International. We have members already in 55 countries, and we're growing every day. It's not my mission here tonight to talk about that. You've all had a piece of paper where if you want to know more, you can sign up and we'll send it to you, or corner me outside and grab me by the lapel and say, tell me more about it, and I'd be happy to talk about it. But I invite you to learn about Freedom Force and then to become a part of it. Now, it's difficult to close a topic like this on a light note. I racked my brain, how do I do this? And finally it dawned on me. I'd like to return to the story of the kittens. I was raised by an old maid school teacher aunt. We called her Aunt Alice. A lot of people did, but she wasn't really my blood aunt, but she raised me. She's like my mother and father all wrapped up in one. Wonderful woman. And she was a school teacher. And one of the amazing things, many amazing things of this woman, is she could always tell in advance by looking at a little kitten. You'd look at the litter of kittens and she'd say, well, that one is a male and that one is a female and the rest are all females. And we said, Aunt Alice, how can you tell? I mean, there's no documentation available on these little kittens, you know? And she said, trust me. Sure enough, every time, I swear, those kittens would grow up to be cats and she would have named it correctly. And we always wondered, how did Aunt Alice do that? What was the Aunt Alice formula? And finally one day she told me. She said, Edward, it's really quite simple. She says, give them a few days until they start to develop some fur and they begin to get bone structure. And then she said, just take a look at their faces. The ones with the broad faces, broader than the rest, are going to be tomcats, and the ones with the little narrow faces are going to be female cats. It's that simple. And you know, she was right. If you know what to look for, and you know what the secret is, it's easy. I've been amazing my friends ever since, using the Aunt Alice formula. And so I want to close by telling you that story as a reminder that sometimes the most difficult problems can be solved much easier than you think. Thank you very much.
That was awesome.
Oh, you like it?
Thank you, Ed, for that great speech. It was a switch, that's for sure. I was not aware of it. But I hope you agree with me that it was a good switch. It's a subject of very importance because it does get very much to the heart of the problem that we've been facing and also providing you with a solution. And one of the reasons I did invite Mr. Griffin here to speak was the fact that I had recently joined the Freedom Force International, and I let Mr. Griffin know that I think it's an important institution, and I think the approach that he has is part of that. And when for example, I told Ed, so what do you think I could do? He said, well, you're already doing it. You already did something. You already started Freedom Law School. You have your conferences and other things that you do. We need to have more people do more stuff like you and become part of Freedom Force International. So one of my challenges to you is that maybe you can start your own thing that you're doing in no matter what. Some magazine, some radio publication, become an elected official, become a successful businessman that helps donates to the cause. Some activist out there that is very good at what you do. Whatever way that you think you can contribute to a higher level and become a leader in a new way, why not do that and be part of Freedom Force International at the same time? So I invite you, if you receive the form, to consider becoming a member of Freedom Force International. And that tomorrow morning we'll start 9 o'clock in the morning, and we'll start with Save the Patriot, the founder and fiduciary, Mr. John Codmeyer. So folks, don't hang around too much. Get some sleep, get some rest. So tomorrow morning you'll be fresh to hear all of our great speakers tomorrow morning. Thank you and have a good night.